Okay, so the biggest hurdle for this adaptation had to be the after-death scene with Dumbledore. It was hard enough for me just reading it to get a solid idea of how the scene would play out, and honestly I think what they came up with was pretty amazing. I do think it's really hard for somebody who's not familiar with the books, but I think that's the best you could get. Cinematically, it was very striking to get a blindingly white backdrop following two very dark movies. Even in the exteriors, it's all been overcast and dull, and to go straight from the shadows and fog of the Forbidden Forest into this completely white environment is really jarring. Easy to play with. Okay, this part gets kind of fuzzy. I love the attention to detail in this scene just because Dumbledore is exactly as Harry last saw him, the night of his death, and the robes that are still kind of grungy around the hem from the lake they went to and he got poisoned. I don't remember if Harry is wearing what he died in. I think so. I'd hope so, although I don't remember a jacket. Anyway, the content of the scene is pretty difficult too because it's largely exposition, so it's a lot of dialogue that could be put somewhere else, maybe with Snape's exposition, and would have been so much easier to deal with than this sort of existential vision. But it really has to be this, with Harry's soul in limbo. Whether or not you believe in the soul, excuse me, it's accepted fact in the books. That's how the Horcruxes work. It's a piece of the soul split off, and that's why Voldemort is the creepy skinned baby under a bench, because that's all that's left of his soul after being fragmented and destroyed piece by piece. Diary, ring, locket. Why can't they do this? Diary, ring, cup, diadem, locket, snake, Harry. Voldemort, right? So it's an eighth of his soul. An eighth. Oh right, we're in limbo with Harry's soul, getting information from Dumbledore somehow. And it had to be there in limbo because the importance of the scene, through all the exposition, is Harry's choice to return to life, to carry on the fight, to finish the job even though he had already given his life for the cause. I think that scene was impossible, and they did the best I can imagine. Still gonna be hard for people who don't know what's going on, but I think that's the best they could do. Now there are a lot of scenes missing that I feel were really pivotal to the story and the film is really lacking for their absence. The largest oversight, or cut of actual footage, I don't care which, there's no excuse for it, is the subplot with Tonks and Lupin's son. There's like the slightest hint of something at the beginning of part 1, like, we have news, and then cut off. Which must have meant absolutely nothing to someone not familiar with the books. And then in this hugely important and emotional scene in the forest as Harry is going to his death accompanied by those dead that he loved, there's suddenly mention of Lupin's son, in passing, from nowhere. In the book, we find out Tonks is pregnant, then Harry and Lupin have a falling out when Lupin wants to join them and Harry's pissed that he'd leave his unborn son behind, and then a reconciliation when Lupin brings news to Bill and Fleur's cottage that Tonks has had the baby. Admittedly, that might be a lot to fit in its entirety. Have the story in there or don't. I'd rather they just cut the whole thing than leave it half-assed like it was. Seriously pissed off. There's too much about the Dumbledore history, backstory, exposition for me to deal with right now. It was just weird that this huge amount of information suddenly came to light in the 7th book, basically out of nowhere, with no reference or lead up to it from any of the previous books. That would be a nightmare to read, if it were me, were I the one expected to write the adaptation. Back to the subject of scenes being missing, what's interesting is that we don't actually see a lot of this huge battle that's going on inside Hogwarts. We see a lot of the lead up and a lot of the damage being done to the shields and the perimeter, but the actual combat within the castle doesn't show up that much in the movie. It's primarily because we're following Harry, again, our viewpoint character, and he's busy elsewhere taking care of Horcrux business. So we don't really see the battle, we just see the aftermath later when you walk into the Great Hall and see row upon row of the dead, which honestly is a lot more difficult to handle. Watching the Weasleys react to Fred's death as opposed to actually witnessing it, I think it's actually harder. This was all particularly hard for me because all the desperately, gut-wrenchingly sad scenes are completely silent, and I desperately needed to cry. Speaking of crying, let's talk about Snape's death. I actually liked most of the changes they made here, primarily the location. Much as I love the Shrieking Shack, it's honestly one of my favorite sets ever, with the whole thing sort of moving and swaying like it's breathing. It's a pretty crappy place for a death scene, and for Harry to just overhear what was going on was really disappointing to me. In the movie, we overhear it, yes, but we also have this horrifying visual through frosted glass of the snake's attack. It's brutal and cringeworthy, and it makes Harry's reaction to it much more poignant. Snape, the man that Harry passionately hates, is dying needlessly and horribly in front of him, and he goes basically to comfort him. That's huge. Then we collect Snape's memories, and he has tears, which is not really how it's supposed to work, but I really loved it anyway. And he dies looking into Lily's eyes, and it's so desperately sad. And then Harry goes to the pensive, and he sees the truth, and we see Snape finding Lily dead. Oh god. I'm a crier. A lot. And boys crying really sets me off. Alan Rickman crying? Oh god. So, all the Snape-related stuff in the movie was good. Winding down here. So we're down to the final, most important, and most infuriating issue. One line of missing dialogue. One f***ing line. When Voldemort is returning to Hogwarts with Harry's body, he tells them all that Harry's dead and that he died running away, trying to save himself. So not only is their hero dead, but he's also a coward. He was abandoning them. Voldemort's trying to humiliate Harry. It's about the most demoralizing thing he could possibly say to crush the spirits of those who still opposed him. Let me look it up. Harry Potter is dead. He was killed as he ran away, trying to save himself while you laid down your lives for him. That one line. And honestly, it would have been fine. If they skipped it, fine, sure, whatever. Except then Neville, who becomes badass and basically has the best character arc of any of them throughout the books and the movies. He gives this impassioned speech about how Harry's death doesn't mean the end of the battle. They're not fighting for him, they're fighting for everyone, they're fighting for good. It's still a good speech, but it doesn't have the context to make it great, to make this incredible, inspiring moment that it's supposed to be. It made me so angry. So there's a whole lot of stuff I'm not getting to talk about because I'm falling asleep on camera. It's too much, and this video is probably like 20 minutes long already. Beautiful animation in part 1 for the story of the three brothers. The music is big sweeping scores. Originally done by John Williams. Hedwig's theme is the Harry Potter theme. Everything there. He did the first 3, and then people built on his themes and moved on. It's all his. I don't care what anyone else does. The Draco subplot. I actually like that they kept that in. It's something that I don't think was necessary, but it was really nice because we got to see him. He was such an important character all the way through books and movies, but it was nice to see that ultimately he's not evil. He's just a kid in a bad situation, and I like that it is still his parents try to just get them out of there so they can just live. I'm doing this a lot. What is with the hand? I'm using my hands a lot more in this video than normal. I think that's due to tiredness. And the epilogue. Oh, the epilogue. It bothered me in the book because it felt a lot like flogging the good guy horse. You're named after wonderful guys. Albus Severus? Really? That's just mean. But it actually kind of worked better for me on screen. I liked it. It ended up being a pretty good resolution. I was surprised. Although apparently to make Ginny older, they just made her hair bigger. She kind of had a Jackie O thing going on. And it's not that it didn't work for her, it was just kind of odd. And then Draco was balding, so there you go. Final verdict. The books are well worth a read. I said why earlier, I'm not going to paraphrase. The adaptations are actually pretty good. Even if they're not absolutely down to the last detail faithful. You can't put everything in there, guys. There's just not time or actual ability to do some of these things on screen and do it well. There's a lot of things that I might have done differently, but honestly, there's just so much source material, it's incredible that this happened at all. I would say sure, watch the movies if you're willing to commit to it. There are prerequisites. If you're not gonna read the books, you have to be willing to overlook a lot of little details that don't matter to the plot. They're plugs directly from the book, just for the fans. There's dirt on your nose. They're not gonna make sense to you, just go with it. Also, if you don't read the books, you must watch the movies in order. If you don't make it through all 8, fine. Do not mix them up. Do not skip around. You are out of your element, Donnie. That's too much. Specifically to this movie, as this whole video is supposed to be and isn't. Do not see Deathly Hallows without being familiar with all the movie canon before it. There's no point. Okay. I'm going to bed now. Yeah.